Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Great Migration Podcast. I am your co host, D. Tyler Davis, also known as Shabazz. I also have my co host, partner in crime, Eric Stafford of the KCTC. He will be joining me in a second. Today's broadcast is the Harlem Hellfighters, the Forgotten Regiment. They can't be too forgotten if they are recognized by me. Today's objectives we will always have your key terms. The key terms for today, and Mr. Stafford will be going over those in just a second, are what are the Harlem Hellfighters? The French Croix de Guerre, I believe I pronounced that correct. Jim Reese, Europe. My man, Henry Johnson, AKA the Black Death, I'm sorry, General Blackjack Pershing. And central questions we're going to answer today is during World War I, why were only a few Black soldiers allowed to fight on the front lines? Another question we're going to answer is who were the Harlem Hellfighters and why aren't they more famous? And thirdly, is it a myth or a fact that Black soldiers brought jazz music to Europe during World War I? Now I will turn it over to Eric Stafford. Eric, go ahead and make your presence known, sir.
I will do that. Well, the Harlem Hellfighters were originally nicknamed the Black Rattlers for the rattlesnake insignia that adorned their uniforms, and they were called the Men of Bronze by the French. It is believed that the German foes were the ones that nicknamed them the Harlem Hellfighters, and that was because of their ferocity and the fact that they were just so courageous in battle. So that's where they actually got their nickname from. But they were not any. None of them were trained fighters at all. They were actually musicians, and they recruited the regiment. They actually went out after musicians to make up the company of soldiers. But due to the fact that they were in war, their battle skills were required, and because of their ferociousness and their courageous attitude and their willingness to go toe to toe with their adversaries, they were nicknamed the Harlem Hellfighters. But none of them were trained soldiers at all, and they were mustered out of Harlem, New York. But uh, they saw more time on the infantry on the front lines than any other regiment in any other American regiment in World War One, and they were shunned by the Americans actually. But the French welcomed their presence. A lot of the American soldiers did not want to fight alongside Black troops, but the French, they did not feel that way about them, despite the fact that there was a lot of propaganda that was put out about the Harlem Hellfighters by Americans themselves. But the French, they disregarded all that until and so because of their bravery and because of their heart, they received what was the equivalent to the Purple Heart, which was the French award, the Croix de Guerre. Well, I apologize, but I didn't do too well in French. But the Croix de Guerre, they won that award. And also, you also have one soldier in particular whose name was his nickname was Henry Johnson, Black Death. And the French army assigned Johnson's regiment to an outpost, to outpost 20 on the edge of Argonne Forest in the Champagne region of France, and equipped them with French rifles and helmets and very little equipment. And he was able to fight off over 30 soldiers by himself. And he rescued Needham Roberts, who had been captured. So he rescued them from their adversaries, but he suffered 21 wounds on his own that he realized that he suffered himself in the ordeal. But the act of valor earned him the nickname Black Death. But so he was very instrumental a very instrumental part in the Harlem Hellfighters and in that legacy by killing so many soldiers, wounding so many soldiers by himself. So he displayed an insurmountable amount of heart. And then there was John J. Pershing, who was nicknamed Nigger Jack or Black Jack Pershing because of his fondness of Negro troops. Now, he, from what I understand, he was one of the people, one of the soldiers, one of the commanders that was actually spreading negative propaganda about the Hellfighters in his communication with the French. However, he valued the service of African Americans or of Negro soldiers. And ever since the Spanish American War, he has relied upon Negro soldiers and they've always been with him. So he never went to war without a Black soldier. So he earned the nickname Black Jack or Nigger Jack because of the value that he put in the bravery of Black soldiers. So jazz, the the thing about World War One that a lot of people don't realize is that that's how Europe was exposed to jazz was through Harlem Hellfighters, through the Harlem Hellfighters. Jim Reese, Europe in particular, was a musician, and in New York City, he organized a musicians union. And during World War One, by the time World War One had came about, he had already known quite a few notable musicians because of his experience in New York. And they were the first on the battlefield. They provided the entertainment to the troops, and so they worked twofold. They provided entertainment to the troops, and they spent a lot of times on the front, a lot of time, more time than anybody, on the front lines. But that is how Europe was exposed to jazz, and Europe has always had a fondness for jazz. Um, a lot of musicians went to Europe. People like Mary Lou Williams. She actually had her own nightclub in Paris, France. Richard Wright was someone else who was highly revered as a Black artist in France. So over in France, Blacks were well received, but their first introduction to African Americans would have been through jazz, and it would have been through Jim Reese's Harlem's Hellfighters.
We missed one.
Um,
No, you covered everything.
yeah, I covered everything. Now, I butchered the Purple Heart Award.
I think we both butchered that. All right, Mr. Stafford, good job. So now you guys understand the key terms. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to build what we call a Black history vocabulary. And probably the next session will show you all the words that you should know or key terms that you should be familiar with now. So this is the part, I guess, where I'm up to bat. All right. In answering the first question posed at the beginning of this podcast, why were only a few Black soldiers allowed to fight in the front lines during World War I? I'm gonna be direct to the point. The Black soldiers who did fight on the front line during World War I was never supposed to be there in the first place. When the United States joined the war in 1917, Blacks overwhelmingly wanted to fight. They wanted to prove themselves to white America that they weren't second-class citizens. In fact, so many Black men volunteered to fight that after 1 week of President Wilson's declaration of war, the War Department had to stop accepting Black volunteers because the quotas for African Americans were already filled. Blacks were only initially used in World War I as ditch diggers, cooks, and labor hands, anything other than fighting. Now, some of you might be wondering why this was, but if you understand the history of the United States military, you will understand that Black people have always had to prove themselves. And truth be told, the military wasn't officially desegregated until after World War II. Let me read that back to you. The United States military wasn't officially desegregated until after World War II. President George Washington and Southerners did not want to use Blacks during the Revolutionary War, even though the British government enthusiastically did. During the Civil War, President Lincoln was fearful that if he authorized recruitment of Black soldiers, the border states would secede from the Union. And even though 180,000 Black soldiers would go on to fight in the Civil War, most were put in non-combat or supporting roles. There were more of the same of this for Blacks at the beginning of World War II. During World War I. When the United States joined World War I, whites in southern states complained so much about the numbers of Black soldiers training at the military bases that the War Department had to come up with a quota system that no more than 1/4 of the trainees in any army camp in the United States could be Black. Now, in the background, while this is happening, you also had United States senators such as Kimball Vatterman of Mississippi, who did not want Black soldiers fighting in the war because he believed that drafting Black soldiers would result in, and I quote, arrogant, strutting representatives of the Black soldiery in every community, end quote, which would jeopardize the whole structure of white supremacy. The only reason why Black soldiers saw any combat was because the Black politicians and leaders complained so much about it. But, you know, then you had another problem. If you train Black soldiers, it didn't make any difference because the white American soldiers didn't want to fight next with them. So because Blacks were seen as too stupid and slow on the front lines, and giving them a chance to fight in that arena would prove hypocritical. Nevertheless, as Eric said, General John Blackjack Pershing was fond of Black troops, and he came up with the brilliant idea of putting the 369th Infantry with the French Army, since the French Army had previous fighting experience next to Black soldiers in Senegal, Africa. Now, two things I want you to overstand, not understand. I need you to overstand it. None of the Harlem Hellfighters ever received any combat training, and they all played a musical instrument. Let me run that back for you. None of the Harlem Hellfighters ever received any combat training, and they all played a musical instrument. They also served, as Eric said, 191 days on the front line, which made them the longest serving regiment out of any American in World War I. Why we don't talk more about American patriots like these, beyond my, I'm being sarcastic, but it's beyond my imagination, my comprehension. The one thing I want you to note about Black soldiers being over in Europe around this time, they didn't experience any Jim Crow. Now, this is not to say they didn't experience any racism. For some reason, American Blacks seem to believe there's no racism in Europe. There is. It's just a little bit different, but there wasn't any Jim Crow, meaning Black soldiers couldn't be told what places they could and couldn't go into and where they had to sit. And then, like Eric said, the French people adored them. They knew the Black soldiers were there to liberate them, and they appreciated it, and they showed their appreciation. So this is one of the reasons why a lot of Black soldiers, when they came back, they were heavily involved in the rise of the Red Summer of 1919, because they had gotten used to certain freedoms while in Europe, and they didn't want to give them up without a fight. Now, I'm trying to figure out still General Pershing. And by that, I mean, I know this. I know he appreciated the fighting ability of Black soldiers in battle. Yet, I also view him very much as a white man of his time. And the reason I say this is because while in Europe, Pershing put out a memo to white American officers that read, "We must appreciate the rise of any pronounced degree of intimacy between French officers and Black officers. We may be courteous and amenable to the last, but we cannot deal with them on the same plane as white officers without deeply wounding the latter. We must not eat with them. We must not shake hands with them, seem to talk to them, or meet with them outside of the requirements of military service. We must not commend too highly these troops, particularly in front of white Americans. Make a point of keeping the native cantonment from spoiling the Negro. White Americans become very incensed at any particular expression of intimacy between white and black men, end quote. General Pershing was also against black soldiers wearing the military uniform on their journeys back to the United States. However, this might have been more of a preventative measure. There are numerous instances of black soldiers who returned to the South wearing military uniforms and ended up either being lynched, castrated, or both. Some Southern white men found the sight of a black man in uniform as an abomination because they believed it made blacks uppity. As a matter of fact, in 1921, out of the 64 people who were lynched in the United States, 59 were black. Lynching became more in vogue. In 1919, Du Bois, W.B. Du Bois, penned this really simple poem, and he called it Returning Soldiers. We return. We return from fighting. We return fighting. Now, since I have implied the reason why the Harlem Hellfighters aren't more famous, I hope you guys can read between the lines. I will move to answer the last question posed at the beginning of this podcast. And it is a fact, as Mr. Stafford told you, that the Harlem Hellfighters brought jazz to Europe. The regiment was originally not supposed to fight on the front lines. As a matter of fact, Jim Reese Europe had a problem finding people to find slots because they had to be filled with musicians. I'm going to close out my slot by playing out this short video that goes a little bit more in depth, showing the black soldiers bringing jazz to the French.
Now, World War I brought about significant social change, not least the introduction of jazz to Europe. Thanks to a black American regiment of musicians called the Harlem Hellfighters, the French discovered the joys of syncopation. More than a century on, American musician Jason Moran is raising fresh awareness of the Hellfighters and their leader, James Reese Europe. Jane O'Brien has the story.
When America entered World War I, the 369th Black Infantry Regiment was sent to France. Better known as the Harlem Hellfighters, they were also musicians. And when they set foot on the continent, jazz came with them.
When the French audience hears them for the first time, they're like, what is this music? How does this sound like this? You know? Can I see your instrument? You must be doing something tricky with it to make it sound this way.
100 years later, the sound of the Hellfighters has been reproduced by young musicians from historically black colleges. This performance at the Kennedy Center is part of efforts to rekindle awareness of their legacy, and in particular, their leader, James Reese Europe. Europe was already a famous musician in New York. His complex melodies and driving rhythms had helped establish black music, as it was known then. Jason Moran has created a tribute to Europe with a new work based on some of his compositions. How do you freshen that up then and make it sound contemporary?
The way that I like to think about this one, we also play it fast for a while, and in my band we play it kind of messy. So that's the one way, right? It's to show the mess in all this. Over the 1 hour that we present this work, we present a history to James Reese Europe. This is how we feel about you. This is how we want to honor your work. This is how it feels to us today.
Europe survived the war and returned to America to rave reviews. But a few months later, he was stabbed in the neck by his drummer and died aged 39. Forgotten for so long, he is now remembered as one of the great masters of jazz. Jane O'Brien, BBC News, Washington.
Some great tunes there.
That's actually a tragic ending to a
Yeah.
very bright
Right.
future.
Yeah, I didn't know he died like that. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's he wasn't that old. They
39
just
years old.
they were, yeah. What we will do now, Mr. Stafford will come with the summation
Yes,
of what
sir.
we've talked about.
So, just to be clear, African Americans, Negroes, Black people, we have been engaged in every war that America has been involved in. We have participated in that. Crispus Attucks was the first to die in the Boston Tea Party. You have Salem Poor as well in the Revolutionary War. You have Jocko Graves, a 12-year-old who risked his life holding a lantern at Mount Vernon so George Washington and his soldiers could know where their horses were. He died to death. He died to death. He died in a blizzard because of his bravery, and what this country meant to him as a young Black man at 12 years old, as a Black boy at 12 years old. But that's the Revolutionary War. Then you have the War of 1812. You have people like Andrew Jackson, who actually lied to slaves and told them that he would give them their freedom if they joined him in the Battle of New Orleans. And he lied to them, told them that, hey, I never owned you, so I didn't have the right to set you free. But nonetheless, Black people, they were engaged in that war. One Black person, he killed over 6 people. He was 62 years old. His name is James Roberts. Then you have the Civil War. And Lincoln, to be clear, again, he didn't even think about freeing Blacks until the Confederacy was clearly whipping the Union's butt. Then he decided to let Blacks fight in the war because he was afraid to give firearms and put them in the hands of Blacks. So that's why for a long time, they did not let Blacks fight in the Civil War. But then in order to save the Union, he had to set the slaves free because the Union needed them, just as they were needed in the Spanish-American War of the immunes. And then you have World War I with Harlem's Hellfighters. And the beautiful thing about Harlem's Hellfighters, they not only showed their bravery, but they also showed their talent because they exposed the world to jazz and also their bravery. And that's why they were nicknamed the Harlem's Hellfighters and received awards and everything. And they were honored and revered in France, where when they came back to their home, they were shunned and treated less than human. So what's that old saying? A prophet is always dishonored in his hometown. So I guess that could go for African Americans here in America. So with that, we've always showed our bravery and we've always been here fighting for this country. So the Harlem's Hellfighter is an excellent example of the legacy that we've set forth thus far.
That was very excellent. I didn't know you could get deep like that, Mr.
Oh,
Stafford.
I guess because I went to Ray South. I don't know. Maybe it had something to do with that.
Oh, we throwing out names of schools now, huh?
Yeah.
Well, Arkansas A&M, UAPB in the house, and I'm not going to leave out Langston University. We in the house too. I went to both of them, graduated from both of them, so don't be trying to crack no jokes. No jokes.
Yeah.
Two excellent schools. What were you about to say?
Well, I went to my share of colleges as well. Now, I just talked about high school, but Lincoln University, Penn Valley, CMS, I kind of made my rounds, so I have been exposed.
The real LU, not Lincoln, Langston University.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah, I know I might have some Lincoln people out there.
Yeah.
And people that didn't go to an HBCU, you're probably like, what's the big deal? It's one time I can truly say it's a Black thing. You don't understand. Anyway,
yeah.
You don't understand unless you went to an HBCU.
But
Um,
yeah,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
go ahead, go ahead,
No,
Eric.
no, no. I'm just saying, yeah, you probably do have some Lincoln Knights in the house because we are in Missouri. So
Oh, y'all deep in here, but so is Arkansas M&M, UAPB.
yeah, no
Yeah.
doubt. No
All right,
doubt.
all right. You know, one day, and we're gonna move on, but one day
Hmm.
we should do a topic on Black universities or something, because I like the rivalry
Right.
amongst schools. It's always a good thing. But um, what we want to do
Indeed.
is close. We want to close out is we have a Black history lesson to share with you guys. I do have a blog. I'll give you the web address to that so you can access this. There's a video attached to this. The video is like 3 minutes and 30 seconds long or something like that. Um, Basically, all the information that we have gone over, not all of it, but it's kind of condensed. Really interesting video, probably up until maybe ninth, 10th grade. This first part here, these are just supposed to be simple answers. Down here, the reflections part, these are more of a written piece. Number 4, where it says summarize how you describe to a friend who the Harlem Renaissance, who the Harlem Hellfighters were. That needs to be a paragraph, full 4 sentence paragraph. You have to make sure you're specific to kids because they always try to cheat you. Now, with, with this is down here. This is kind of teaching your kids how to express themselves verbally. And the reason why I kind of would like a paragraph down here is summarizing to their friends how they would explain who the Harlem Hellfighters are. By them writing a full sentence and by you checking on it, not only can you see how they express themselves or at the level that they should be, but also writing wise. If they're in the 8th grade, but they're writing in real simple sentences, that might be a clue that they're not where they need to be as far as writing wise. So um, the answer sheet and the question sheet I will put after we edit this video, and I'll post it embedded in the video so you can click on and access and go there. But the question sheet and the video are on there. It's called The Heroes of Color. And the answer sheet, the video is also on there. So what we would like to do, Eric, you have anything you want to say before we go?
I was going to talk about the writing piece. Make sure that one thing that I advise is that you read your paragraph out loud. And then that way you could actually, find more mistakes, and it allows you to edit it a lot more easier. And you're able to make sure that you're writing in complete sentences and forming complete thoughts. So that's why I would suggest that you have your kids, once they write the paragraph, to read it out loud to you.
Yeah, and I forgot to, good thing you said that. On the question sheet, usually what I do is I didn't give any instructions. I'm sorry, bad teacher. Usually what I would do is print out the sheet, if you can print it out, or have your child look at it, to look over to see what the questions are before. They're not in order. I made sure of that. So when they look at the video, let them play the video through one full time, and then let them rewind the video or go back as many times as they want to. Now, on the written answers, it's not necessarily a yes or no questions. These are basically opinion pieces. So they might have looked at the Harlem Hellfighters and might not have liked them. So they might express, but they are supposed to explain either way what they liked. What did they like about them? Well, they were ferocious. They weren't necessarily, they didn't receive any combat training, but they still went out and did what they had to do. That means they were very courageous. Stuff like that you want to pull out. So want to add that on what Mr. Stafford said, because I forgot to put that piece in there. Also, we will be returning January 12th, 6 o'clock. I believe that is the second Tuesday in January. Mr. Stafford will be leading the topic and the discussion. And I am very excited because we're going to finally start talking about the Black Mafia. Eric,
Uh-oh.
give him a little piece. Give him just a little piece. Tell him about Mr. Payne and
Felix
your
H.
topic.
Payne. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the topic of the conversation will be Felix H. Payne. He came to Kansas City right at the turn of the century, opened up a barbershop that doubled as a tavern. He formed an alliance with the what would have been the Irish Mafia. And even though gambling was illegal, he had a spinning policy wheel right outside of his tavern. That's how much juice he had because of the connections that he had. But back, you know how people play the lottery today. Back then, Black folks played the numbers or policy. And Felix Payne, he was the policy king here in Kansas City. And not only was he that, he owned a professional baseball team, and he also was a publisher. He was a newspaper publisher and an electrifying speaker, very impactful here in the Midwest. So I'm excited to dive into that conversation and share with you all his exploits here in the middle of America.
And just for those of you who might be paying attention to Chris Rock, who is playing a character on Fargo this season, it is loosely based on the character that Mr. Stafford will be talking about next month. So make sure you join in. And I need you, if you like what you hear, I need you to smash up the likes, subscribe, and tell other people about us.
And share.
And share. And send us a note and let us know some of the things that you want to see and some of the things you think we can improve. blackhistoryforbeginners@gmail.com. We appreciate you coming on, and we look forward to the next time. And remember, read and think for yourself, because it's not illegal yet.